Hey everybody, it's Nick here for Grayscale Gorilla. I am the Gorilla, and today I have a big tutorial planned. It's probably going to be at least 2 parts, and it's going to cover a lot of questions that I get asked to do tutorials for, including there's going to be camera projection, some more dynamics using MoGraph 2, some depth of field techniques using Cinema 4D, and then we're going to composite the whole thing in After Effects and add our depth of field and composite it and do all that fun stuff in After Effects. So it's going to be a big tutorial, and let's get started and let me show you what the heck we're building. So here's the full movie. Let me just start this and loop it, I guess, and we'll talk about it. So this was made, the scene, the house, the yard, and the trees and everything is all from a photo. We're going to camera project that onto some 3D geometry, and then we're going to use the type tool and some mode dynamics to have these big chunks of text kind of fall to the ground. We're also going to use global illumination and ambient occlusion to kind of shade our text here, and then we're going to use a light to an extra light to light it for the sun. We're also you see the depth of field technique here to make sure that things are blown out. We get this really shallow, nice depth of field thing going on. So we're going to do that as well. So a lot of stuff to do. Let's get started and do this thing. So let me close this puppy. Here we are in Cinema. The first thing we need to do is load our texture in. It's that texture for the house. So I'm going to come in here to my color channel. I just made a new material, and I'm going to load in our photo. And this could be any photo. In this case, I'm going to bring it in to the search path. This photo works really well because there's not a lot of overlap, and I'll show you what I mean when we start to build our camera projection. But the first thing we're going to do is add this as a background. So I'm adding a background here, and we're going to add that texture, and we're going to use frontal projection, and that's the right one. Mine is by default. Make sure yours is frontal projection. I'm going to hit render here and just see that we have our nice little scene here, background for reference, and we're ready to get started. Next thing we'll do is we're basically going to use this grid to kind of line up our perspective. And what we want to do is kind of line up where the camera would be based on this grid. And right now, scale, we can fix scale later. We pull out and see if we could just align to whatever photo you're using, align the floor to it. And you're going to see we have maybe a little bit of an issue, and that's because we may need a wider angle lens. So I'm actually going to grab a camera, and I'm going to take our focal length and go to something like 28. I'm going to turn the camera on, and I think now we're going to have an easier time kind of lining up this lawn. We can always change this later, but you really want to be as close as you can. I'm using the edge of these shrubs here, and then the edge of the lawn over here. I'm assuming it's pretty close to a 90-degree angle. There's not a lot to go off of. These lines are kind of crooked in the lawn, but you can see we're getting close. I'm going to go right about there. And we're just going to call that one for now. And this is our plane, right? This is our plane that is going to set up the scene so that we can project all of this information onto geometry. Now let's start building the geometry that we need to project all of this onto. So the first thing we need is a floor plane. And I'm not going to use the floor. I'm actually just going to use a normal plane. And then I'm going to scale this thing way up. You can see how high we need to go. But basically, I'm going to go to right where my grid stops. And basically, it's this edge of the lawn here and this edge of the lawn here, right where the shrubs are. And now we have that plane is our bottom chunk here. And let's go ahead and get the projection going on that plane so we can start to do the rest of the scene. We're going to drag that texture up onto the plane, and we also want to make sure it's on frontal mapping. And actually, now that we have a camera, we actually want to use camera mapping. So go into your projection, go to camera mapping, and in your camera mapping, it's going to ask you which camera you want to project with. And that's where we pull our camera in. And I'm going to do the same with the background, actually. I'm going to use, no, I'm going to keep the background frontal, actually. You can see now we have a couple issues, mainly that it's not bright enough. What we need to do is a little trick they call composite to the background. So let's, now that we have a plane in here, let's get some dummy text. You know what? Let's wait. Let's see. Let's get our project to the background. So if we right-click on our plane, you want to go to your Cinema 4D tags, go to compositing. Right here, you're going to see compositing background. And when we hit that, you're going to see it's actually going to composite through to the background. And that's good. That's what we want. So let's continue and build out the rest of the scene, the house, and all this other stuff. If we go off of our camera, you're going to see on our plane is essentially a copy of our lawn. And what we actually need to do is turn off this tiling. We don't want it to tile. We just want the camera to project this part of the photo onto our plane, and that's exactly what it's doing. And if we go back to our camera, you're going to see, and we hit render, this is actually a plane, and it all looks normal because we're looking at it through the camera. In fact, we love this camera so much, we want to lock it. So let's right-click again, go down to Protection, and now if we try to move the camera, it's not going to let us, and that's exactly what we want. What we do want, though, is to get away from the camera, add a new plane. So I'm going to add a new plane here. And we're going to move this plane over to the edge, and this is going to represent the house. So the first thing we need to do is scale it up a little bit. We also need to rotate it 90 degrees and start to build out this section, which is the house. Now, that's a good start. Let's go back into our camera and see how far we need to move this thing around to cover up the house. I basically want the whole front of the house all the way to this shrub and then this edge. So I'm going to move it up. Right there is actually looking pretty close. I'm going to go up just a little bit higher, and you can see our perspective is looking pretty good. Our perspective to the house is really close. Now, depending on how detailed your scene is, and especially with so much stuff happening up front, we can be a little bit sloppy with this, but you really do want to be as tight as you can. So with that in mind, let's build the roof. And you really, another thing to keep in mind is if we turn off our camera, you really want your seams to get to interact. You don't want your house layer to be out here, or you're going to have a big gap between this and that when the camera starts moving. Here's our house for the front of the house. I'm going to duplicate this. This is front. I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to call it roof. I'm going to move it up, and I'm going to rotate it back to simulate the roof. And then I'm going to go back to the camera, and it looks like we actually need to rotate a little bit more. And I'm going to just kind of move this up. You can see I'm moving it up. I'm going to scale this back a little bit so we get our rooftop. And it looks like we need it a little bit larger. I'm just going to scale. That's not going to give me a fast enough scale, so I'm going to use this and then move it. And I'm going to go back to, sorry, here we go. I'm going to go away from our camera and just move this way up so it's hitting the edge of the house instead of out front of it. And now we're back to our camera. And now I'm actually just going to use our coordinates here to kind of start to position this a little bit closer. And it's right on the Z. And now I'm just going to tweak it a little bit more. I think we need a little bit larger piece here. And again, you just want to get it as close as you can. We can always kind of try to tweak it later. But this is looking pretty good. You know, you don't want anything in the background. We may need to bend it, rotate it a little bit more, and move it around just a bit. Okay, so we're getting close. I think we're going to stop there and see where else we need a plane. So before we go any further, let's bring not only our camera projected material, but also our compositing tag that has our composite background onto our front and our roof. And I'm hitting Control drag to drag those in. And you're going to see now when we render, we again, it looks really identical, but if we go back to our camera, you can see what happens is this camera is now projecting the material onto or projecting that onto the whole scene. So from here everything looks normal, but from here everything looks a little wacky. We do have a seam in our roof that we want to get rid of, so let's while we're here kind of pull that down and back so that our seam is close. We may need to do a little bit more adjusting once we're here. There we go. Not bad. That's looking pretty good. It may be a little rough up here, but this is gonna be cropped off. I think we're gonna render this 16:9, so we're only concerned about this front section. One last piece that we need to project is this whole back area, all the woods or whatever this is back here, trees, I guess they call them from the city, you know. So let's just grab this front one, this front layer, and move it back. And I'm going to rotate it, and really this just needs to kind of scale up and take the whole rest of the image. So I'm just going to grab that and just kind of scale this whole thing up, and just make sure behind the roof here is protected and everything has a place to project onto. And now if we go away from our camera, we're going to see we have everything we need. Now I'm going to move this and cheat this a little closer, and rotate it just so we don't have too much of a space. Like I said, these spaces are where things can really get hairy. So I don't want it right up close because I do want some parallax between the front of the lawn and the back. So let's see what this does for us. Now, we basically have everything mapped. If I hit render, we are ready to go. Now, the secret is that you need two cameras, one to project. So let's call this projector. And this camera is not going to move. This camera is in charge of projecting all this data into the scene and onto our kind of fake geometry, okay? What we are going to do, though, is duplicate this camera. We're going to call it move camera, something like that. And then I'm going to take off this protection tag, bam, and this allows us to animate the camera. And so just to show you, just to keep in mind, we can actually now with this camera come in and fly around. So if we come to this camera, we can actually now fly around the scene just a little bit. Now we don't have a lot of room to move, but for the move that we're doing, we're going to have just enough. And so let's set up the rest of our scene, and you'll see what we can get away with basically with this camera move. So let's do it. Let's get our type in. So for that, I'm going to use MoGraph. If you don't have MoGraph and you don't have the new MoGraph, that's okay. You can use the spline tool here, the text tool in your splines, and then use an extrude NURB to make the text. You won't be able to do all the cool bouncy stuff we're going to do, but that is a good way to make the text. I'm going to use MoGraph text object because, you know, really everyone should have MoGraph. I really do recommend it. I'm going to scale this puppy up, and I'm going to show you something cool, man. we're going to call this house. I just said, I put house in here because I thought it was funny. There's a house back here, but then it kind of looked like a Fox, advertisement, so I kept it. Here's our type. The first thing I need to do, we need to scale this back down just a little bit. What I'm really excited about, and why I didn't know before, I don't know, but Gotham is actually supported by Cinema 4D. So I'm going to use one of my favorites, Gotham Ultra, and I'm going to get out of here, and you're going to see this nice fat types that's going to set right in there. I'm going to take the depth slider and really give it some depth, and this is because we really need this type to be able to sit on its own. It's going to fall and move around, and I really need a good solid base for it to kind of hit the ground and kind of not fall over. First of all, let's get out of our cameras here and just make sure that we're not animating anything, and just so we could fly around, we could see our text. Things are looking good. You can see our original camera still here projecting all this cool stuff onto the ground. We have our type. I'm actually going to move our type in and back and then around, somewhere around here. And then if we go to our projector camera, you're going to see it. I'm going to grab it right in the Z and get out of there. I'm just going to kind of hover this camera around here. And you can see now we have, if we hit render, we have our kind of basic text with everything on it. But we're missing all the shadowing and all that fun stuff, right? So that is not good. So the first thing we need to do is kind of light this scene. And what I'm going to use is a mixture of global illumination and ambient occlusion. So the first thing we're going to do is set up our global illumination. And to do that, I'm going to add a sky object. Right here is a sky object. And then I'm going to add a new material. I'm going to pull that up here. And on the luminance channel, I'm going to shut off the color channel, shut off the specular. On the luminance channel, I'm going to come in and grab a gradient and set it to V gradient. And basically, what I need you to do is think about your scene, think about your photo, and think about the colors that are surrounding the type. Basically, we have a kind of a grayish, bluish sky. So, in fact, what we could do is do a quick render. If I cancel out of here, I'm going to do a quick render, and here's the colors from our scene. I'm actually going to pick colors from our scene to build this gradient. So over here we have the white. I'm going to double click on that, and I'm going to double click again on this white, and it's going to give me this little search glass thing here, and this will allow me to just go ahead and straight up pick a color from the sky. So you see this grayish blue. That's what we want. We want to click OK. We're going to do the same thing for the ground. Now the ground is all green. Surrounding all of this is green, right? You can imagine behind the type here, behind the camera, is maybe more kind of woodsy, suburb woods kind of area thing going on. So let's, we lost our render, so let's render again. Let's double click again, and then on the magnifying glass here again, we're just going to pick maybe like a dark green from these kind of shrubs over here, and let's just see what that looks like. So we have our ramp, and this is essentially what's going to start to light our scene. This is applied to our sky object, and our sky object is, if you look up around everything else, is all these colors. So we have at the top, we have our gray, and at the bottom we have our green. And now we're going to come in here and we're going to set up our global illumination, see what it looks like. In our render settings, you need to go to Effect, Global Illumination. Again, similar to MoGraph, this is a module. If you don't have global illumination, you could try setting up normal, just everyday lights right here and see how far you get. But this is a really specific look that you're pretty much only going to be able to get with global illumination. So keep that in mind. In your General tab for global illumination, we want to set this to, for now, QMC still image, IRQMC still image. When we do our final render, we're going to have to choose something else, probably full animation, but for now, that will do. My gamma, I am at 1.8 gamma. And if you're on a Mac older than Leopard, you're going to be 1.8. If you're on Snow Leopard, you're 2.2. And if you're on Windows, you're also 2.2. So keep that in mind. And we're also going to turn up our depth here to 2. And this is going to let our light bounce around a little bit farther. GI is a whole mess in itself. And I probably won't get into everything, but I'll try to explain as we go along. I'm going to set both of these to low. And this is just so we can see a general reaction to everything. We're going to turn this up when we do our final render. But for now, for kind of testing out, let's keep that on low. I think we're all set. So I'm going to click render, and we're going to see what happens. And there we are. Now what is happening is the global illumination is going to look around the whole scene, and it's going to pick up on all the colors, including this photo, including the floor, and also, and really especially this sky here that we made to light our text. You can see there's shadows going on. It's light on the top, it's green on the bottom, and we're getting close to what the heck this thing is going to look like. For me, there's a little too much green. And it's also floating, right? So let's grab our text and kind of move it down until it's kind of in the grass there. I'm going to do another quick render. And we're getting there. So let's go into our gradient and kind of get rid of some of the green. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to cheat this kind of knob thing over here. And what I may do is actually pull up some green and have it where right on the horizon it's kind of green, and then it quickly goes to like a gray. So basically play around with the slider and come back and see what your amount of green is. You definitely do want some green, or whatever your photo has in it, to light your scene. The thing that global illumination does really well is it uses surrounding colors to light the scene, and that is a really good cue to try to make things look more realistic. Obviously, big chunky text in the middle of the yard isn't the most realistic thing, but we are going for some sort of a, kind of a photoreal type of situation. So, that's not bad. Maybe still a little green, so I'm going to pull this down, do another render, and, that's pretty good for now. What we can always do is color correct just this later down the road, especially something with colors. I know I've said it before, but something with like colors, you want to get close with 3D, and then you really want to tweak your stuff in a final kind of composition, something like After Effects or Fusion. In our case, we're going to have After Effects here down the road, so let's get close and then render and get it into a tool that has more color correction stuff in it. So that's looking good. Let's add, the next thing we need to add is some, excuse me. Okay, I'm just making sure everything's good. Yeah, we have shadowing on the floor, so that's good. Our composite background's working. Next thing we're going to add is ambient occlusion. It's in the same effect box right here. Ambient occlusion, bam, and a whole bunch more settings pop up. Again, ambient occlusion is something that really can get hairy, but for now, what we're going to do is turn the accuracy down. I'm going to turn it down to about 60%. That's going to keep our renders pretty quick. You're going to see that ambient occlusion does take a while to render, like most cool things. But for now, we're going to turn it down so that we can see its general effect while we play, and then when we do our final render, we'll turn this up. Minimum samples, I'm going to turn down to like 8. Maximum, I'm going to go to 100. And let's go back and see what that gives us. You can see there's not much that it's doing quite yet. You can see there's a little bit more shadowing at the bottom right here where the E and the S and all this stuff is touching the floor or touching our ground plane. The reason we're not seeing too much of it is because of a scale issue. Remember that everything matters when it comes to scale in 3D. So when we come back here, there's a setting right there that says maximum ray length. And basically, not to get too far into ambient occlusion, but basically ambient occlusion looks for objects that are close to other objects and then tries to shadow those objects. So when the S gets close to the ground, it's trying to shadow it to try to give it a little bit more texture, a little bit more depth. but it's only looking 100 meters around in a circle. What we need to do is turn that puppy up. So let's make it 600 meters and come back and do a render. And you're going to see now we have actually a little bit more realistic shadowing here. It got darker in the middle of the letters here. It got really dark in the O, maybe even too dark. But you can see that it is giving us way more of a realistic look. So let's do one more thing in our ambient occlusion in your render settings. In the contrast, I want you to do a negative contrast, just a little bit less. At least in this scene, we have an outdoor setting. And in outdoors, it's rare that things get really, really dark. Like inside this O is really, really dark. And it's really rare that even on an outcast type of day, which, well, it may be sunny. We're going to make it sunny, I think. Just remember that outdoor scenes, it's really hard to make things really black unless it's really shadowy. So I may turn that down even further. -30 contrast. And that's looking good too. Now, when we go out to After Effects, we're going to do multi-pass render, and I'll be able to adjust that amount later, so I'm not too worried about it. Just want to get it close for now. So that's looking close, man. I think we're getting there. So the next thing we're going to do is in fact, I'm going to rotate this text just a bit. That looks a little better for me. We're going to add our sun. So we need to add a real light. And this real light is going to act as like kind of a rim light, a rear light kind of a thing for this whole text object. And this is basically, like I say, it's emulating the sun. So I'm just going to kind of put it back here. I'm going to pretend, it kind of looks like an outcast photo or overcast photo. But you can see that when we add this light and we do some compositing, we can make it look a little bit more bright outside. And that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to position it back here. And I'm going to make this light a little, reddish, kind of orangish maybe. Sun colored. Doesn't have to be crazy. It just has to be warm. And let's do a quick render. Let's see what we got. You can see we do have a much more bright outdoor feeling from this light, but we're getting some artifacts. It's way too bright, and we also don't have any shadow. So the first thing we're going to do is add an area shadow. A sun would probably give us more of a hard shadow, but in this case, I think the hard shadow is going to be a little too hard for us. I actually prefer the area shadow for this one. Let's see what that does. Oh, that just looks fun, doesn't it? I'm going to move it up and just try to get that shadow a little tighter, but I'm also going to turn it down. The global illumination's a little bright. In fact, maybe I'll turn the global illumination down just a bit. Right here in your intensity, you can actually turn this down to maybe 90. Secondary intensity, I'll turn that down as well. And you can see we just need to dial in some numbers here. I'm going to turn down our light a little bit. Oh, sorry, I get that out of your way. That's getting closer. Now we can kind of fly up in here. And, maybe still a little bit too much green, so we can come in here for our gradient and kind of just pinch that down a little bit. Our sky's got maybe even a little too much green in it, so we're going to pull that down. Little subtle tweaks go a long way at this point. And that's actually starting to look pretty good to me. We have our nice area shadow here going down, and we have our sunlit deal. And the only thing I'm seeing now is our real light is actually projecting shadows onto our background. Remember, this is all projected, and if I kind of fly in and around, you're going to see we have this little space, and if I hit render, you're going to see this stuff is actually shadowing each other. We want to get rid of that. So let's fly back to kind of here, and I'll show you where we shut that off. We have all these compositing tags to deal with, and what those do is kind of tell the object what to look for and what not to look for, what to ignore. So we could say we don't want this to be seen by camera or by global illumination or all this stuff. So actually for everything except for the ground, we don't really need global illumination. So I'm going to select all 3 of these tags, and I'm going to change them all at once. This is the front, the roof, and this is actually the trees. All 3 of these, I'm going to select them all, shift select them, and I'm going to say cast shadows, nope. Receive shadows, no. Seen by camera, yes, we want them to be seen by camera. Rays, I don't think we need that even. Seen by GI, no. Also, compositing background we need. Everything else looks fine. So let's just do a quick render just to make sure. We have a little seam here, but that's okay because our camera is never going to go over there. It's going to go right there. Everything looks good. It's also going to cut down on our render times, which I really, really like, especially with all this other stuff going on. By shutting off as many options as you can, the computer is going to focus on what it needs to do and not what it doesn't. So hey, we're getting close here. Let's see what else we need to do. The next thing we'll do is we'll animate the type coming in. Like I said, there's probably other ways to have this type fly in, but I use the new Mode Dynamics that comes with MoGraph 2, and let's set that up. The first thing I'm looking for is I think I need to make the text even longer. So, you know, just so it doesn't flip around. So let's do a render, make sure it looks okay. I like that. I really do. Let's get this thing bouncing around. So the first thing we need to do is put this text object into a fracture object. And so let's make the fracture object. Let's pull the text object into it. And what this fracture object is going to do is separate all these letters into an individual kind of like particle or object. What we need to set this to is, I think it's explode segments and connect. And what that's going to do is allow each letter to come apart in the correct way. It's going to keep all the caps and all this stuff. Let's see if it's working. So let's just pull it up in the air. And of course, we need to add a MoGraph tag rigid body. And if you want to learn more about dynamics, I have plenty of tutorials about the new Mo Dynamics from that comes with MoGraph 2. So if you want to know what all this stuff is really specifically, go check that out. But for now, just know you need that tag here. And you also, on your floor, where things are going to bounce around, this plane right here, you also need a rigid body tag. And then after that, you just click play, and you're all set. You're all good to go. You're going to see, man, things are sticking pretty good. In fact, I think it's a little too good. Maybe it's just explode segments. Well, let's raise it in the air and see if maybe we need a little bit more for it to bounce around. See, it's all together. It's all one chunk, and that's not what we want. We want explode segments and connect. Still, things are separate. So how are we gonna deal with it? Let's see what we need to do here. Fracture object, that's good. That's good. Text object, well, we could always make that separate. That works. But I think I've done this with live text. Why it's not working, I'm not quite sure. So right now, here I'm missing one step, and I'm going to see if this fixes it. On our text object, our caps right here, we want those to be a fillet cap or fillet cap. I'm still not quite sure how to say that. But what that's going to do is, if we flip around to the back of the text just so we could see a little better, because there's a light back here, that's going to add a bevel to our text. So first of all, we need to up the steps. I'm going to use 3 steps just so it rounds this edge off a little bit. A couple other things I'm going to do is turn down the radius. I don't want it to be that big. I'm going to try like 5. And this is just rounding our edge off just a bit. And that's going to catch a little bit more light in things when we do a render. It's just going to make it a little softer and some fun stuff there going on. The last thing I need to do is constrain it, and that is going to keep it at its original size. The text won't be too fat. Let's just come around front, make sure it's looking good. I think that looks good. And let's see if those caps allow the object to fall at a different rate. It does not. So, man, I have no idea what I did different. Let's see if we could figure this out really quickly. And let's do it. All right, so I went and checked that out, and I realize now that we don't actually need this fracture object. The text object is part of MoGraph, and it works already with this tag. So we can actually unparent it from our fracture object, delete the fracture object, and this text object, because it's part of the MoGraph module, automatically sees this tag and reacts the way we need it to without the fracture object. Fracture objects are more for items and objects that are not part of the MoGraph module, to split them up. But as you'll see, once we hit this, this is what we wanted. We want each letter to react on its own, and this this will let us do it all on its own. So sorry about that. You have a little bit of a sidetrack there, but that is okay. So right now we have pretty much what we want. We have our letters kind of falling down. You see they fall really slowly, and that's not really what we want. We want them to look a little bit more natural when they fall. Right now they feel as big as a house, and they're really not. They're only to scale maybe a couple feet tall, and things that are a couple feet tall just don't fall that slow, and it's all about scale. And I've mentioned it before, but essentially we need to scale this whole scene down. So let's go ahead and do that. We don't need to scale the sky, don't need to scale the background, but we do need to scale all of the cameras and all this stuff. I'm worried about this locked camera, but let's just see what happens. I'm going to make a null object. I'm just going to call it scale. I'm going to take everything into that scale except for our background. And then, let me stop the render here. And then I'm going to scale this down and see what happens. Okay, we did not get our camera, so let me undo that, and I'm going to take off this protection tag for now. We're going to go back to the scale, and we're just going to scale everything down. And you're going to see that nothing is really changing in relation to each other, and that's exactly what we want. We want everything to go down. And now that when we hit play, let's go back. Let's watch this fall. It is falling a little bit more natural. It is maybe about twice as small right now. You're going to see a couple things that happened. Our text is really long, and it's also way, way up high, right? And that's because the only things that are not scaling are the text parameters, which is stretching this out, and also the height of this. So we can fix that later. But for now, I think we're going to scale just a little bit more just to get a kind of a fun fall. Now you can see we have a couple things going on. Let's see if we can go in there and fix it. I'm going to scale it back up just a bit. We need a little bit more weight for those objects. We don't want them too small looking. But you can see how scale really plays a lot with dynamics. And that's obviously because big things kind of fall at in different ways than small things. All right, that's looking good. Let's go to our projector camera. Make sure everything is aligned, and try to fix this H bouncing. And we're also going to rescale our text back just a little bit. So our depth, I'm going to pull back. In fact, maybe about half. And we're getting there. The E kind of takes off on a loop here, and it's mainly because this all is bouncing at the same time. And what we're going to do is actually angle our text so it's not all bouncing at the same time. So if we pull it back up here and we take the text and we just angle it down a little bit, and that will help. The other thing we're going to do is we're actually going to use a step effector. So on our text object, if we go to MoGraph, step effector, there it is. You can see a step effector affects each clone or each item a little bit more and more. In this case, it's actually affecting the scale. If we render real quick, you'll see that's not what we want. We actually want it to affect a position. So if we come into here, let me pull this over so you can see. We're going to turn off the scale. We're actually going to turn on position, and we're just going to kind of have it go up a little bit, and maybe, I don't know, maybe forward just a little bit as it goes. And what this will do is kind of alternate it falling. So if we raise that up a little bit, when we click play, you're going to see it's not quite, again, what we want quite yet, but the H falls before the E. And we may even exaggerate that a little bit just so they kind of come down. And we're getting there. Now, that's essentially what we want. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, our text just a little bit smaller. I'm also going to rotate our text just a little bit. So using that step effector, I'm actually going to come into rotation and try to rotate our text just so maybe it'll affect how it bounces. So if we just turn that just a little, oh, we're so close. I'm going to zoom in here just so we could see it. You see our E wants to kind of rotate around. So I'm just going to play with these little rotation numbers, just 1 or 2 degrees. And then now you can see we have another problem with our H. But again, play around with all this stuff, and you're eventually going to get what you want. That's not bad. It's still a little bouncy. So what we're going to do is in the text object itself, we're going to go to mass, and we're going to say rotational mass. We're going to turn that up. And what that does is it keeps our objects from wanting to rotate. Apparently it's not working in this case. So we're going to turn that back down, and instead let's try custom density, and we'll just turn our density up a little bit. And this is effectively giving us kind of a similar effect to scaling our object. And really right here with something like dynamics, it's really just about playing with it until you get it. You really can't animate the dynamics. You can't force it to do what you want sometimes. So you really just need to tweak things. That's close. That's close, actually. You really just need to tweak things until it looks the way you want it to. So maybe we won't have it go as far. So our step effector, I'm going to pull the E down just a bit. See what this does. Oh my gosh, look at that. We're getting close. As you can see, there is a little trial and error with physics on how things fall, especially when you need it legible at the end. So there it is. That's what it's going to look like when it falls. Let's go back to our move camera and put a camera animation on this. The whole reason we projected it is so that we can actually animate this camera. And this is really the coolest part. So let's put a camera move on this and show off our projection. So I'm going to actually, the start of this animation is going to be right here. It's going to be with all the text up, and it's going to be basically the empty yard with nothing going on. So I'm going to go to our move camera, and I'm going to set a keyframe. So really all we need to worry about are rotation and position keyframe. So I'm going to shut off scale and parameter here on our move camera, and I'm going to use this little stopwatch, or this little stopwatch is After Effects, this little key to set our keyframe, and that's going to be our first keyframe for both rotation and position. Then we're going to go to the end. I'm actually going to make this a little bit longer. I'm going to make it 150 frames, something like that, so we can let our text kind of, wobble around for a second. That's kind of cool that the U's moving. So right there at the last frame, maybe a little bit less, 140 or so. I'm going to now zoom in and check this out. We have all the parallax of our house, of the trees, of the yard. We can actually fly over parts of the yard here. And I'm going to pick a new position rotation. I'm going to kind of rotate around and frame up the house a little bit, something like this. You really can't go too far with camera projection. can maybe get a couple degrees back and forth and maybe in and out a little bit. But you can see we will get a pretty cool look out of it. So I'm going to set a camera or set a keyframe there and just kind of look and see what that looks like. I think we can get away with a little bit more. I'm going to go back. I think it's 140 is my keyframe area. I'm going to actually zoom in just a bit more. I'm going to see if we could cheat it even more. And by rotating, all you have to do is make sure that there's nothing sticking out that doesn't have a texture on it. If I go too far, you're going to see I can't look that far over. So somewhere maybe around here is fine. And I'm going to reset that keyframe right there for that move camera. Bam. And we're getting close. I still think we can get a little bit more of a move on it. I'm going to hit render here, see what it looks like. Now you see we are having an issue up here, but we're going to make this 16 by 9. So really all we're worried about is right around from here to here. And if you actually go into your render settings and in your output you set this your film aspect to 16 by 9 and then lock your ratio and come back, it's going to put in some kind of fake lines. You may be able to see this. They're kind of faint, but they're right here. Line here and a line here that shows you where your render is. And when it renders out, you know, it'll hopefully stay within those lines. So here and there, and I think we're pretty dang close. In fact, maybe what we'll do is we'll go down. Maybe we'll put the camera closer to the ground at the end here and give it some more drama. So actually we need to go to our keyframe, which is 140, then drop it down and maybe call this our second keyframe. So let's see what that does. That did not work. Let's go to 140. Let's try it again. We're going to move down somewhere around here. And then for our move camera, you got to select the move camera and then you select the keyframe, and now it should keep it. So looking good. We can even speed that move up just a little bit more. So I'm just going to move that keyframe. Hey, that looks pretty dang good. So let's check out the camera move. What we can do now is just kind of tweak a couple more things before I do our render. I want to make this shadow a little bit longer. I want it more sunset-y, kind of way off over here in the distance. So I'm going to take the light, and I can just barely see it over here. I'm going to move it down a little bit and over, and I'm going to see if that gives me a better shadow. That's a little better. I'm going to get out of the move camera here, just pull it down, and actually just pull it back a little bit. Just trying to elongate that shadow just so we have this nice sexy shadow when it falls. I don't want to cut off the end though. See how the end is cut off and it's just one solid chunk shadow? Don't want that. So I'm going to move that back up. Go back to our camera. Go back to our camera, and then kind of maybe in the middle. There we go. Come on back. Hit render. That is looking pretty good. So let's go to our last frame. Make sure we have a good final frame, you know, because we're going to kind of sit here for a while. And, you know, that looks good. One thing I do want to do is rotate our text just so we're not so straight on the text. Let's move it up, get away from our camera, and then I'm just going to rotate like this. Hopefully it doesn't screw up our physics too much because we kind of had a good thing going. Let's see what that does. Oh, of course. Oh, of course. So let's see what we can do here. So let's just adjust the scale just a bit. Oh, look at that. Look at how perfect that is. I adjusted the scale just enough, and it really sits down in that grass really nice. Pretty legible, a little bit skewed. The S, the U's in front of the S, I like that a lot. And we want to make sure our last frame is looking good. There's no weird angles or corners or anything, and that's house, and that's a house back there, and we got shadows, and Man, I think we're on to something, don't you? Um, let's see. One last thing. I think we need one more little chunk back here. I think there's data above this roof that isn't being displayed because this isn't going back far enough. So actually, what we really need is just to scale this up. I'm just going to scale that up. And then when we go back, you're going to see when we hit render, any data above that roof that we had, just enough right there. See that? That's just enough to cover our 16 by 9. And I think we're going to be good for this render. So let's do it. Let's get this thing prepared and out to After Effects. So let's stop there actually. So for the next tutorial, we're going to prepare our scene in Cinema, and we're going to export it for After Effects and get it ready to do the final composite, do the depth of field. We're going to add depth of field. We still have that to do. And basically set up the scene and put in all the buffers and all the fun stuff that we can export to After Effects to then composite this thing and make it look a little extra nice. So stay tuned for part 2 of this tutorial. Hope you liked the first one, and I can't wait to show you the second part, and I'll see you guys there. Thanks for watching, everybody.